Welcome to another episode of EV Rider. This week we've got BMW's brand new i4 M50. This is the very first BMW to wear the vaulted M Performance brand as an EV. And with me is Malcolm Hogan. He, of course, is the owner and founder of AutomotiveAddicts.com. He's been driving and evaluating the i4 for a full week now. Malcolm, what are your impressions?
So right off the bat, I'm pretty impressed with it. Usually I don't say that about many EVs, but this one is more on the enthusiast side of things. It's not a full M vehicle, but it is pretty much like an M Sport package vehicle. You know, BMW kind of brands that M, on a lot of things. This being the i4 M50. Don't get it confused with any of the other M cars like the M3, M4, M5, those. But this one, believe it or not, is a hair faster than the M3 sedan. In some independent tests, they've got as fast as 3.3, 0 to 60 times.
Yeah, I saw that. Car and Driver got a 3.3, and that would even beat what I've seen with the Mustang Mach-E GT performance.
Right.
And speaking of that, it sounds like BMW went down a similar road. Of course, the Mach-E has that 5-second boost.
Right,
but then they shut down the fun. Now, I understand BMW's got an equivalent speed boost?
So yeah, there is a boost in the Sport Boost drive mode, which is pretty much kind of like their Sport Plus drive mode. It will actually give you a 10-second boost, which is the full 536 horsepower and 586 pound-feet of torque. That torque is actually available all the time. Normally the two motors together are outputting 469 horsepower, I believe, working in harmony together. The boost gives you 536 horsepower.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing here is this is the one disadvantage of EVs, and here's what I mean by that. Repeated performance. When it comes to an EV, those motors and batteries, I've noticed a lot of the manufacturers seem to be shutting them down after a run or two to keep them from overheating. For example, even the Tesla, the vaulted Model S Plaid, which is currently the fastest high production automobile out there right now, you get to do that run, but you've got to cool that battery down to an ideal temperature. Sit there and wait for it before you get that perfect run. And of course, with a Hellcat, you're going to just keep pounding at it all day long.
Yeah. But the crazy thing about these EVs, they always hook up, no traction or stability control issues, as long as you don't put it into a turn. And speaking of putting it into a turn, this car actually weighs a lot, which I was kind of surprised. Not necessarily disappointed, because BMW's done a good job of hiding that weight. This one actually weighs just over 5,000 pounds, which is quite a bit. That's 1,200 pounds more than a BMW M3.
Yeah, and you know what? That is another reality of the current generation of electric vehicles. You are going to see increased weights, and everybody talks about how the maintenance costs will be less, and in many ways I believe that's going to prove out to be true, but one area where we're likely to see increased maintenance costs is tires. Because of the increased weights, from what I've read, you're looking at a wear rate that on average, depends on the car, is approximately 20% quicker, and that's because of that added weight.
Absolutely, and Teslas are very notorious for that. We noticed a long time ago in the Tesla Model S is, especially with the air suspension system that lowered the vehicle to highway speeds, add a little bit of more camber to the wheels, so that inside of the tire wore out prematurely in a lot of those cars, and customers are complaining about that a lot of times. But tire makers have moved to a lot of these efficiency tires. The past few years for the EVs. It used to be a lot of the hybrids, of course. Now with most of the EVs, you find some version of their eco tire. Michelin has a line of them, the Primacy tires.
Yeah, and that's a good point about this car. Depending on whether you get the base i4 or the M50 Performance with the top tier tires, you're talking about a big difference in range. I mean, the base one is right around 300 miles per charge, whereas this one drops down to something like 227.
Yeah, 227 for this one, and the reason for that is because this one has 20-inch tires, the optional 20-inch tires, which are pretty wide. They're 285s in the rear. But that's going to take away from your range. Normally with the standard 19-inch wheel and tire package on the car, on the M50 version of the i4, you get about 270 or so miles of
Yeah,
range.
that's on the base. That's on the
Yeah, on
base
the base.
I-4. And of course, the other thing about that is we're talking rear-wheel drive on that one, whereas this one we're talking all-wheel drive. If you want that extra grip, if you want that extra cornering and performance, it's going to cost you in terms of efficiency.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So Malcolm, when we talk about the i4, there's also a huge difference in pricing. If you want to just get into the bare bones i4 as of today, and of course we know prices are changing all the time with
Right.
inflation, you're looking at $55,900.
Yep.
But that quickly escalates.
Oh yeah, it goes up pretty quickly. The one we're driving now is a pretty much fully loaded vehicle. This one with destination comes to $78,000. Which
Did you say 78?
78.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it's quite a big jump.
But you know, again, if about the only thing comparable right now, there's really only two cars I can think of that are comparable in the market right
Sure.
now. You've got the Model 3 Performance from
Yep.
Tesla,
Right.
and then you have the Polestar 2 from Volvo's all-electric brand.
Right, right.
And if you want a sedan, that's really all you got to choose from currently in the EV world,
Right.
at least in terms of performance sedan.
Yeah.
Now, you know, what I'll say right out of the gate, I recently drove a 2022 Model 3, and, you know, this car is in an entirely different class when you talk about the interior, the feel of the interior. The Tesla, you know, and minimalism is one way to look at it for sure. Some people really like that, but to my eye, I much prefer more elaborate, more finished, you know, driving environment such as this one.
So yeah, right off the bat, this car, I mean, if you weren't in tune to what's going on with the market right now with the BMWs, this one is actually uses the same look as the current 4 Series Grand Coupe, which I had a, you know,
Don't get me started on car companies calling sedans.
Right.
We'll leave that debate for another day.
Oh yeah. That's another story altogether. But funny enough, you know, because this is an EV, you think it would have a flat floor and all that stuff, but it does not. BMW kept a lot of the characteristics of the 4 Series Grand Coupe, even with the drive shaft tunnel in the rear. You know, there's still a drive shaft tunnel back there.
Yeah, and that's a corporate decision that they're doing with all their EVs. I mean, for example, the Mini Cooper SE, which is also owned by BMW, developed by BMW, same thing. They're building gas and electric on the same assembly line. They've decided for now to go in a different direction than the other guys with dedicated platforms.
Sure.
Although they started out with dedicated platform with the i3, although the i3 was so unlike any vehicle BMW had ever done in its history. It was sort of an oddball.
Oh yeah, a lot of people don't know BMW's been in the game for a while, the EV game for quite some time. I think that came out in 2013, 2012 back then. So I mean, you're talking about a whole decade of, you know, BMW having a dedicated EV.
Yeah, and you know, the advantage to doing it this way is they can mix the production volume based on whatever the demand is. So if the EV demand is there, they can scale back a little on the gasoline versions. You know, of course, the disadvantage is packaging. So, for example, this car does not have a front trunk.
Correct.
All the electronics are where the front trunk would go, and that's by necessity because this is a compromise in some ways. Now, where I do think this car also has a big functional advantage over the Tesla Model 3 is in that rear hatch. The Model 3 is actually a notchback. So while the rear seats do fold in the Model 3, it's not a hatchback. So if you're the type that wants to make a Home Depot run, if you want that extra wide opening, then score one for the i4 as opposed to the Model 3.
So this is BMW's new iDrive 8 system. It's updated. It's rolling out to most of the newer BMW vehicles. As you notice, this is somewhat of a curved screen. The screen over here is 14.9 inches. This one is 12.3. The gauge cluster. The digital gauge cluster has changed for the iDrive 8 system as well. Different design. It is somewhat customizable. You can bring up a map system like you can in the older one. Over here, the most confusing part about this one so far is when you display all the apps. It's kind of overwhelming. You have all these apps. You know, you go through the screen here, you're constantly scrolling through all these different apps. But Fortunately, BMW grouped all the vehicle apps in one, just 2 rows of icons, which is pretty good for accessing, your live vehicle information like your tire pressures. You can go back and go to that screen again, and for your charging menu, to set your charging features. But otherwise, you have this home screen that now has all these different tiles, which somewhat like the older version. You can move these tiles around, organize them to where you want, add additional widgets to it. It's nice to have some customization and setting up the way you want it to display your information.
Now, Malcolm, one of the things that I really like about iDrive, or at least have historically, is the fact that it has a jog wheel, so you don't have to be so dependent on touchscreen.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the current jog wheel system?
So yeah, this is good that BMW actually kept this, the physical controls. Some people like the physical controls and they only use the physical controls. Some people like using the touchscreen, but it's good to have that versatility. BMW did away with the physical buttons for the climate control as well, so the climate menu is actually embedded within the screen itself. But fortunately, this little sliver of the climate system is always displayed on the screen, no matter what you have on there. And also for Apple CarPlay, you have a full screen CarPlay on here. Have Waze up here right now. It's one good thing about iDrive has always been it's responsive, very responsive.
So now I'm taking the wheel of the BMW i4 for the first time, my first time driving it, and we have put it in its highest performance mode. Malcolm, go ahead and tell me about that.
So yeah, it has a Sport Boost mode, which is basically their Sport Plus mode, but since this is an EV, they call it Sport Boost. And a Sport Boost, it actually gives you 10 seconds of full throttle, full power, which gives you that full 536 horsepower, 586 pound-feet of torque. Enabling in launch mode, actually, it will vibrate the whole car. The motors will pulsate. It's a neat little thing done on purpose by BMW, just to kind of emulate it being like a internal combustion engine. But of course, it's an EV. So, but yeah, you get a good kick in the seat, from takeoff.
All right, so we're going to give the launch mode a quick try. And hopefully you can hear that soundtrack. Let me just say that we quickly rose in speed there. I don't like to actually give out speeds, but it was definitely peppy. We'll leave it at that. Actually, we've driven a lot of EVs lately between the two of us, and I would say outside of the Model S Plaid, this one feels the quickest of what I've driven. I'd have to really think about whether it was quicker than the Mach-E GT Performance, but it feels quicker. And based on what we saw on Car and Driver, I think probably it's safe to assume it is quicker. I've not seen any instrumented testing that shows that the Mach-E got down to 3.3 seconds. So Malcolm, do you think we're going to see the automakers starting to get really creative with these artificial soundtracks?
Yeah. I mean, the sky's the limit as far as that stuff. I mean, as far as sounds on the outside, that's probably something they're going to face the government, and regulating and all that stuff. But soundtracks inside the car, I mean, manufacturers kind of have the freedom to do what they want. And BMW's chose to go the way with award-winning composer Hans Zimmer, believe it or not, did the composure of the sounds that are emitted inside the BMW i4.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm noticing, the other car that I, again, drove recently, well, my own car, the Mach-E, this has a much more pronounced soundtrack. I would say, first off, the volume of it is higher, which I like. If you're going to go ahead and have something like this, yeah, let's have it. Let's really experience it. And of course, just like the Ford, you can go ahead and turn this off. You don't have to have it. Yep. But yes, it does have nice pickup for sure.
I don't know if the sound takes away from some of the speed or not, It's like when you have the same sound you do in eco mode versus sport mode, you can probably feel the difference, but adding the sound to it kind of changes up things, changes your perception, I think.
I think it does too.
A little bit,
I actually, when I tend to turn on the sound in my own car is when I have people in the car. When I'm driving around myself, for whatever reason, I leave it turned off.
Sure.
But if you want that old school feel, something a little more visceral, this kind of gives it to you. No, it's not the same as the rumble you're going to get out of a nicely tuned exhaust.
Right.
I mean, your brain knows it's not real. That's what's tough about electric vehicles. I mean, I think objectively you look at them and there's just no comparison. The performance is going to exceed what we've known in the internal combustion world. But when it comes to the raw emotion of cars like this, automakers still have to figure that piece out.
Yeah, they do.
Because a sterile car, that's fine for an appliance car, but for a performance car like this, it's got to have a soul.
Sure. Yeah, I think out of all the EVs I've driven so far, I've driven Teslas, the Hyundais, all those. So far, this one has the most soul. Funny enough to say that it's still a sterile car, still an electric car, but BMW's add a little extra to it as far as the soundtrack goes and the driving dynamics. I mean, this drives more on the sporty side versus any other EV that I've driven thus far.
Yeah, and I think just even the form factor helps because this is a traditional sports sedan in style, in driving dynamics, in the gauge cluster, in the seat, steering wheel, the whole bit.
Yep.
So I think that also helps a little bit, and I'm glad to see that we're getting more cars like this as opposed to just SUVs.
Right. Yeah, I think any 3 Series buyer, 4 Series would consider this if they're wanting to move to EV. And there's not many luxury options out there for an EV car.
Now, Malcolm, have you been able to drive a gas Grand Coupe to compare the handling dynamics directly?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I have. Just a few months ago, I had the M440 Grand Coupe. Looks almost identical to this car. Of course, the grille different, and the rear diffuser. There's no exhaust pipe on this car, of course. But dynamically, that car was a really good vehicle. Pretty quick for what it was.
Now, what about though? For example, we're getting on this entrance ramp to I-95.
Sure.
When you're doing real corners, how do the two compare? How good a job did the
they almost feel identical. I know there's a 1,000-pound discrepancy. This one weighs 1,000 pounds more than that car, but as far as the driving dynamics initially, they're about the same until you really push this one to the limit. Pushing this one to the limit, you're gonna get a little bit of understeer, just a tad bit of understeer, but letting off a little bit, can correct it. You won't get any oversteer. The rear end stays pretty much planted, I've noticed.
The all-wheel drive probably helps with all that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at BMW's i4 M50, and for a much more in-depth look at this car, you're going to want to go to Malcolm's website, automotiveaddicts.com, because he's got a really in-depth review. You'll learn a lot more about the car, and you'll also find some other reviews that we've done together on his website and at evrider.tv. Other reviews we've done together include the Volvo C40 and the Ioniq 5. So Malcolm, I got to say thanks again. I've really enjoyed getting to drive this i4. It's been a blast, and I'm looking forward to reading your next review.
Sounds good, and make sure you stay tuned on both our outlets, and got a lot more vehicles coming down the pipeline.
All right, and everyone, thanks so much for watching.